Due to the fact that the Ouspensky Circle only allow you to learn a little bit at a time, it's natural in discourse about them that you have to double back and reestablish a new timeline because that overlaps the previous timeline. It's the same timeline, but what you learn is different when you go back because your point of departure changes a little bit. To illustrate this point, look at the first pre-COVID surfacing of Axis semiotics in a conversation that went on between movies coming out of different studios with different directors and even different countries. That it's a superstructure that's inlaid semiotically and symbolically in the background of a lot of different movies, but emerges from the fourth dimension of the combined structure of these films. And my previous work was about the way that this operated, the discovery that there was a sliding door. It's in all of their movies. Casablanca is just one of the movies in which there's examples. For example, the symbol of the underground, it's a double cross. And Ingrid Bergman, who played Martha Gellhorn, a friend of mine in Whom the Bell Tolls, came from Goebbels cinema. So Casablanca, although it's a turnstile for the resistance and the success of the resistance in World War II, secretly it's a turnstile setting up the Axis revenge system that's encrypted in the semiotic language of this conversation that goes on in the background of these movies. And all of my work pointed out that the defeated in the Civil War reasserted their power after the Civil War through Hollywood film epics like Birth of a Nation about the glamorizing the rise of the KKK. And it happened again after World War II with the very same customers. D.W. Griffith's assistant director, Royal Welsh, made Ronald Reagan's wartime films that has pro-Axis symbolism in it. This was the whole nature of my research. Now, if you go back now, since the discovery from a tip from Kamila Valieva at the Beijing 2024 Olympics, indicating that the productive vein of research is being overlooked with Kharkiv, Moscow natives, PD Ouspensky Circle. So it took a little bit of doing, but I managed to find the actual legacy of P.D. Ouspensky in the entertainment culture from the time when he was friends on the same page as Prokofiev and Picasso was doing the stage settings for Prokofiev. Ouspensky was introducing the idea of the fourth way intelligence, the fourth dimension. And they gleaned from this the idea that, like a two dimensional painting comes from the three-dimensional mind, the three-dimensional mind is a reflection of the fourth dimension, where the noumena, where the spirit, which is all powerful and wise, emanates from. So they decided to have a superstructure story in the background of their movies, which would tell their plan to create a symbolic storyline of shamanism called Story of the Bird. This book, Mikhail Larinov and the Russian avant garde actually goes into the meaning of the bird and the shamanism, which is, of course, the primary fable tale in Gail Burston's script, which provided a tug of war between the Ouspensky Circle and their entertainment so called news media. and the reality, which, someone like me is capable of finding. And if you, for 1 minute, entertain the idea, just academically, that Lanham pulled a double fantasy so he could operate from the studio of the fourth dimension. There's no body, that they staged and faked his death, then everything falls into play. But if you remove that, if you actually believe in his death, it's like a primary thread. The whole thing comes unseen and falls to pieces. And you're left with no explanation for how the attackers in the AIDS attack and COVID got the victims to side with the attackers themselves. The way they did that was by pretending that John Lennon had died. So that's the fundamental theme of the Ouspensky Circle, who used to hang out with Ouspensky. Errol Flynn, who made Reagan's wartime films with D.W. Griffith's assistant director, Raoul Walsh, lived in Laurel Canyon, as did Houdini. So you're dealing with a network of people, revelations about with whom come out on two timelines. And these timelines overlap. One allows you the discovery of the super story that's a conversation between all of these movies in the background. The basic themes of which are that um, Hitler was forgiven by Jesus and came back as Casper the Friendly Ghost. I mean, an important history of this is Hitler's friend King Edward, who came to Wall Street in the 20s and said that the Church of England should control Hollywood. Now, Cecil B. DeMille was put in charge of Radio Free Europe by Alan Dulles, who's notorious for his role in the Kennedy assassination. Another person who's notorious for his role in the Kennedy assassination was Cliff Robertson, who starred as Kennedy in PT 109, and then in the premiere episode of The Outer Limits, which was postponed for Kennedy's state funeral. Remember all that stuff about we now take control of your television sets? And then he went above the World Trade Center in a private plane to watch on 911. And standing with a stiletto outside the World Trade Center posed Dia Gullis. Well, Dia had a namesake at the governor's school who called me on December 8th, 1980, Dia from Dermont. And she had given me a book at the governor's school called Time Must Have a Stop, which is made into a film starring Cliff Robertson. Dia Gullis, although she was with this anthrax crowd, is a friend of Kim Kardashian and Yoko Ono, and her namesake called me 2 years before AIDS even started. And one of her classmates was talking about a scheme to transform the human race by injecting the blood, and ended up in charge of Mount Desert Island's war game, which was Two Virgins Pussy Ball. That's the second aspect of this super story that always comes out in the films. It's always in them, especially the Japanese films. Two Virgins, and that was the name of an album by John and Yoko. So Lennon was front stage and center, and he doubles as Casper. In fact, they used a Japanese woman from You Only Live Twice. So this Ian Fleming, James Bond, Ian Fleming was hanging out with Alan Dulles. It's a very crafty, tight-knit circle who used Picasso's genius and Prokofiev's genius to use a fourth dimensional story that they conversationed into the background as a superscript, and it's in all their movies. Pick a movie and I'll show you where. The reason I was able to detect it when other people haven't is because I'm deaf and I use closed captions. Now, the Beijing Olympics was a pussy bowl, right, in anticipation of the Ukraine. Kalimia Valieva was given permission by Putin to stage her pussy bowl, right? And she took fourth place and flipped the bird. So Kane Crimson was with Fripp, and he was the one who brought me into contact with Pierre Elliott, who was an idiot in Paris with Gurdjieff. A lot of Ouspensky's work is considered sort of like the Freud-Jung relationship with Gurdjieff. And I met a lot of people from the Gurdjieff circles and various. They used to meet at the Catholic Synod. The highly parochial structure of Two Virgins Pussy Bowl to punish sin double fantasy. You imagine you're going to get a second virgin, they're going to throw you out at second, right? It's like the baseball diamond. The diamond symbolizes both Jesus and marital fidelity, right? You're trying to steal second, you get thrown out. Okay, so this is basically a whole system of ulterior parochialism. It's no accident that cleanup time over the Ukraine, I mean over COVID-19, happens with the overthrow of Roe versus Wade. They're finished with this parochial system they were calling the walrus. The script, in addition to the story of the bird, is called I Am the Walrus. And then one of the parochials from Central Catholic in Pittsburgh wrote, the persona is subjected to successive degradations of the X motive and then subsumed into a larger structure dominated by its adversary. So what we see here is the persona. They're talking about a person that said they don't have rights. It's a soulless dummy, right? And that's what they did to JFK. They poached his enigma for Hollywood. Cliff Robertson just went in and poached. We now take control of your television set. So Ouspensky talks about the terror and abyss that person confronted with comprehension initially feels, and then they grow into it. They're making a major transformation of psychology in this new institution of entertainment they call news. It's part of Ouspensky Circle, I call it, including people like Oliver Stone and Noam Chomsky, who stage managed various aspects of the genocide program, and they violated the Environmental Modifications Treaty back in 1974, where they held me hostage, tortured me, deafened me as a symbol for Hiroshima. You have to look at the semiotics in the revenge attack, and Casper comes back and the Axis gets revenge to see all this. But the super story, it's it's going to come back to me what I was going to say. The superstructure and the dynamics of the parochial system that they're using to overthrow our consciousness was inculcated from the fourth dimension. They violated the environmental. Back when they held me hostage as a child, was where I was going. They put out a song called Flame Over Africa, meaning that they're using this climate push of fossil fuels, to get across that that they're making an ultimatum about the human race. You see, Exxon is an equal opportunity employer. They're going to build an ark. It's going to be better for the survivors. Ringo's favorites pat them on the head because they went along with it. Yes and yes. There were TQs, Trump queers, who got loaded with Mula Rula Kakadula from the fourth dimension. These are money bag mystics. There's a word, I forget what we used to use a word for them. I'm trying to remember what the word was. It made us look kind of what's pejorative. I'm trying to remember what assholes. That was the word. Yeah, they're assholes.